and we're going to go ahead and get started. And I think you kind of told me last week that we're going to put too many details, there's too much stuff to comprehend in a short time. So I'm sorry if we just rush through a lot of stuff. I realize there's a lot of history, a lot of details. And it's tough for me to follow the details. I'm just trying to be as general as I can. So if I say there were a bunch of battles, it means there's probably like 10, 15 battles, and there's a lot of individuals involved with it. Can't go into all the details about it. But one thing I was going to mention last week, and it slipped my mind, or I didn't notice in the notes, when that boycott happened in Mecca, when very early in Muhammad's, before he even started, reaching people and so forth, but there was a group of folks at Quraysh that he was, that group wanted to put a boycott on his family, the Hashemites, and I mentioned that they went and traveled over to Ethiopia. Well, it was during that boycott that he made a significant decision, and that is the question of whether he would turn himself in. Because they said, well, you just turn yourself in to us, and we'll just drop all these charges and so forth. And probably they would kill him. That's what the indication from the historians were. Probably would kill him. Or he could form an army, be a world leader, try to conquer everybody around him. And he made that decision at that point during that boycott. He's going to go the political route. He's going to go the win the world route. And when you compare to what Jesus did, remember Jesus was also faced with that question in the desert. Satan put before him, you have all these things of the world, and you bow down and worship him. Or when he was at the end of his life, when he was facing the cross, and his own disciple brought a knife and cut off the ear, and Jesus said, no, this is not my kind of kingdom. I'm not violent. Jesus said, no, I'm turning myself in. I'm yielding myself up. Muhammad said, no, I'm going to take the reins, and I'm going to be a political ruler. I'm going to take my armies and kill other people. And at that point, it's a big decision, I guess a turning point in Muslim, Islamic beliefs. It was a belief that we're going to fight, we're going to win, we're going to conquer you and politically overwhelm you. And some of the things I've been reading about the background, as I said, Muhammad traveled with those caravans in his early years with his uncle. He went to Persia, he went to Palestine, went places. He heard the various religious stories, and I started telling this last time about the early stories of Jesus, the apocryphal, the phony stories that are in some of the stories you can find today, but they're not biblical, they're not inspired stories, such as when Jesus was a small child, he formed out of clay a little bird and he let it loose and flew away. And that story is in some of the apocryphal writings. You remember when he was in his father's, you don't remember, but it was stories about he was in his father's carpenter shop, he sawed off a board and it was too short, so he just pulled the board out and made it long enough. Now these kind of stories, well, that's what Muhammad heard, and he put that kind of stuff in his the writings of the Quran. You'll find some of those same stories about Jesus. And that's why, of course, he rejected Jesus. He heard the false. He heard the heretical stories and heretical things, such as the Monophysites and the Nestorians and these groups that really didn't believe Jesus was really God in flesh. He was a good man. He was a created being. Those kind of things. And so he heard these other stories, and he just thought, I like that story better than the true one, the orthodox one, which we follow according to the Bible. And so all these things, Zoroastrianism, which was a prominent heathen religion out of Persia, he heard those stories. And some of the things that they promoted, he jumped in with. Manichaeism. That was a guy who came up with this idea of a dualism, that there are good and evil, and we're in a constant battle against good and evil. Where does that come from? Manichaeism is basically what he's saying about jihad. We're always fighting, we're always struggling, we always have to win the next battle. So anyway, a lot of this stuff, mixed up religious stuff got compiled in his mind with this so-called visions of what he called Gabriel. I really think when he was afraid, he thought it was a jinn or a genie, which we would say would be an evil spirit. I really think he was right. It probably was an evil spirit that was convincing him of these things, because every time he had to make a decision, even minor decisions in the Quran, he would, just daily decisions about things, he would consult this spirit. And a lot of the Quran is just boring stuff that he writes about, that he didn't write because he wasn't a literate person, but he quoted it. he would say them, and they would become verses in the Quran. Very boring things, you know. Should I wear sandals today, or should I wear, moccasins? I don't know. But he would come up with these things, and especially when he wanted to do things that were morally questionable, he would always say, "Oh, that's what Gabriel told me was okay." We'll talk about some of those today, such as battle type things. Anyway, coming back to where we stopped last time, we came up to the death of Muhammad. I mentioned this morning about how his wives were going crazy, and the folks said, "Oh, he's coming back," and no, he's not coming back. He's dead, and he really was. And the thing about his death, he left no guidelines for succession. In other words, who would be the next Muhammad after he died? He never thought about that, never said anything about that. He had no son, no living son. He had two sons by his first wife, but they died young. And so he had no one really to turn this religious group, and they believed in monotheism. There's one God. He was convinced there was just one God, because he got that from the Jewish, Christian type faith as well. But there was nobody to turn it over to. And the Arabs felt they were always divided, always fighting. I mentioned this time before, that they had clans and tribes, and if you want to get on the good side of the tribe, you bribe them some money, and protection, that kind of thing. So they were always divided. And the same when he died. All these tribes, and all across Arabia, let's see if I can get that thing up there. The map up here. All across the Arabian Peninsula here, with various tribes. Of course, he was born and grew up here in Mecca, moved to Medina, later. But all these tribes, all throughout this region, this is all desert regions. And those tribes, their camels, they were rough, dry people. And to get them on your side, you would have to bribe them, and they would constantly fight. They never agreed. And so Abu Bakr, who was the first convert after his own family became followers of Islam, he believed that only the followers of the Quraysh, this is the family that Muhammad came out of. Remember, this is the family, the tribe that were the caretakers, the keepers of this holy place called that big, huge black box you see in pictures all the time. It's still there today. They were the keepers of that place, and so when folks would come through, they provided them the funding, the money. You had to buy a robe if you wanted to do this pilgrimage. Of course, it was all pagan then, with multiple 360 some gods. Well, the Quraysh family, they were the ones, and they said, we should be followers of Quraysh, because that's his family. He suggested, Abu Bakr, he's an older man too, he suggested Umar. The same one that I told you about this one was going crazy and saying he's going to come back. He suggested Umar to be the next caliph, or the next successor to Muhammad. But then Umar turned around and said, no, not me. Abu Bakr should be the one. Because he's the one that Muhammad always had go to lead the prayers. And whoever leads the prayers leads the people. In other words, the religious leader was also a political leader. And by the way, that's the way it is even today. Amongst there's no such thing as separation of church and state. If you're in Muslim faith, so-called, you are in a political system. And the head man is whoever the religious leader, the top religious person, the leader of prayers. And those prayers are very important. Remember, 5 times a day. That was one of the 5 pillars of Islam, still is, that you pray 5 times a day. At sunrise, noontime, mealtime, lunchtime, whatever meal, afternoon, evening, that is supper time, and then when the sun goes down at dusk. So those 5 times, you're required to pray. It's not a suggestion. You have to pray if you're a Muslim. There are 4 other pillars. We can talk about that some later. But anyway, he led the prayer, so the folks said, yes, that's a good idea. Abu Bakr, next caliph. Caliph, by the way, means successor. So when you hear about caliphate, you're talking about somebody who is head over. You have to have a caliph, which is the main man in the whole system. That's the main caliphate is an area in which this man rules. That's even today. The Meccans, the Medinites, or however you pronounce their names, these two cities, the people in those places, who had assembled for this, what was a tragedy to them, but they all filed by Abu Bakr, shook his hand, and said, "We pledge our allegiance to you." Now, is there another group? Remember just the other day, a group that has pledged their allegiance to ISIS, or actually to the caliph of ISIS. I forget his name now, but he's also, first name is Abu Bakr, and then he has another name after that. But the successor, they considered him the next leader. And Abu Bakr was extremely loyal to Muhammad. And he planned to follow through what Muhammad was going to do. Before he died, Muhammad planned to make an excursion back to the north. Up here in Syria, he had taken a group of troops up there, and they got beaten back by the Byzantine troops, which are basically Roman troops, somewhere in here, we don't know where, and they all came running back with their tails between their legs. He felt like, I'm going to get back at those people, but he died. Well, Abu Bakr knew his plans, so he said, okay, we'll continue with it. To avenge the beating they took at Mu'tah by the Byzantine troops, he was going to send the grandson of Muhammad, Osama. Does that name sound familiar? Grandson is Osama. And he would lead the excursion. He's only 20 years old. He's a young man. A lot of folks felt like, I don't know a young man like that leading troops. We need somebody that's a little more mature. But Abu Bakr said, no, we're going to send him up there and lead the troops. And he went up there and actually had a victory, won the victory. The fact that he took with him a man by the name of Khalid bin al-Walid, or Walid. Khalid became a very important leader later. But he sort of took a back row seat in that excursion, and helped to win that battle and return the victory. Before they went there, by the way, they attacked another tribe, their own people, the Arab people, on their way up there. And they won that battle. So this division between the tribes and the clans, it was kind of like a rebellion. They're all pulling apart after Muhammad died. Well, they're trying to get these folks back together. And they commissioned Khalid after that. Since he went with them, Khalid was then commissioned by Abu Bakr to recover rebellious Arabia. All these tribes all around Arabia here. He was commissioned to go get them and bring them back. So he won versus the tribe he fought against. I'm not going to name the tribe because I can't remember. But then he turned eastward, over here towards, I'm not sure if it's this area, but he went eastward to another battle, attacked another tribe. Of course, they won. They pulled these tribes back together somewhat. They call it the Battle of Yamama. I don't know where that is, but it was a very fierce battle, a very well-known battle. 10,000 dead, they believe. These are all reports that were said years later. You don't know how accurate they are, but it was a very fierce battle. And from the eastern side of the Arabian Peninsula. He made an alliance after beating that tribe. Later made an alliance, we'll talk about it, because he went from there, took that tribe northward and fought the Persians. Before we get there, at that battle, it was a very big battle in the area. There's so many people being killed, so many of the Muslim people being killed. Abu Bakr said, wait a minute, we better get the Quran in written form, because a lot of these people, they all memorized it. They could quote it from memory, and that's how they carried on with books and information and things in those days, because nobody could read. They just memorized things, and they made it more or less poetic form, and they could, sort of like a rap song. They could say it and remember it. When somebody died, they realized, we know what this is written for. And that's when he commissioned Isaiah, the servant, to write down in written form the Quran. And along with that, they decided to write down the testimonies of his wives and the soldiers and the people who were close to Muhammad, so we'll know some of the events. And that's called the Hadith. We talked about that before. Hadith was also written along with that. And those two books, the Quran and the Hadith, are used together even today, the Hadith, to interpret what the Quran says. From the victory on the Yamama side, somewhere over, they went south towards Oman. And In fact, one, the territory of Oman, the battle there, and when those tribes back, they'd probably already beaten them before, but the tribes were, wandering off and brought them back. Then from there he went westward towards Yemen, right down here in the bottom. From Oman down to Yemen, bringing those folks in. And you remember there's a town called Najran, right in there? Christian group of people who lived there. Well, they attacked there as well. Basically massacred all the Christians that were in that place. So by 633, only 1 year, approximately 1 year after Muhammad's death, Abu Bakr and these troops brought all of Arabia back into the fold of Islam. So here they are, the whole Arabian Peninsula. And I mentioned it, Randy, I think you asked me the numbers. About 6 million people population of this Arabian Peninsula at that time. That's what the historians say. And now, to say they're all Muslim, that they were in name only, because when you conquered somebody, you say they're ours. Now, whether they believe or not, another question. But for 6 million people, sounds like a big number. But if you look to the north, in what's on this map called the Sassanid, especially the Persian Empire over here, and these Arabs down here, Abu Bakr, all these Muslims now, this entire United Peninsula, they're looking, where should we go from here? Well, why not go north? Persia, Syria right in here, the Byzantine Empire up here. They didn't really think about that. Both of those, that was an empire of about 50 million people. Persian Empire, about 30 million. I'm sorry, that's backwards. 30 million Byzantine, 50 million Persian. 50 million as opposed to 6 million. So you can see that extreme difference. And these nations were empires. Persia had been an empire for over 1,000 years. And they had tremendous armies, powerful armies. They never considered those Arabs down there at the below them to the south. But they looked north and thought, wow, all those people. And the philosophy, the military philosophy of the Arabs. Now think about this for a second. These folks rode camels. They were in the desert. They took caravans around. Their philosophy was this. They were a fighting group of people because they would fight each other all the time. But these were raiders. These weren't occupiers. If they brought the armies in and conquered somebody, they didn't stay. They took the stuff of their spoils, the produce of war, the riches. They took and left. Somebody compared it to a fox or a coyote taking a chicken coop. He's not going to live there. He's just going to come and get what he can and leave. And that's what the Arab fighting troops were like. They were raiders, not occupiers. The Bedouins would rob, rape, and run, basically. And that began changing because they looked at these empires, Persia and Byzantine. Basically, the Byzantines are Roman, what's left of the Roman Empire this time, the eastern side of the Roman Empire. Because if you remember, the western side, where Rome and Italy and all those were conquered by the Visigoths and others. These barbarians had taken over pretty much. And what happened was these two nations to the north of them, Persia and Byzantine, had been fighting each other for half a century, 50 years, back and forth, battling each other. And basically they were exhausted and depleted of their troops and people, and they just, they were very weak. Now nobody knew that at the time, and the Arabs certainly didn't. They never thought about these desert dwellers to the south of them. This is the underbelly of their empires. They thought, oh, those folks are down the desert, they're not going to bother us. In fact, if anything, that was a safe realm because nobody's going to try to attack across the desert. Well, these Arabs said, well, let's try. Let's give it a shot. Let's go north. Let's go to Persia first. And Khalid was the first who made that alliance, as I mentioned, with that tribe he conquered on the eastern side over here. And Khalid took his troops right up here to this region here. And you see that Euphrates River and it splits in the Tigris Euphrates right here. But right in that region at the top of the Persian Gulf was where he first battled. And he realized that there's some weaknesses they had and some weaknesses the Muslims had. By taking that alliance with some others, it took some more fighting troops. The Persians could not fight in the desert. The Arabs knew everything about fighting in the desert. So what they did, let me flip this to another screen. There's the region, as I mentioned last time, that was basically at Muhammad's death. That's what they possessed. That's the region that believed and were controlled by the Muslims. And then later they expanded. They're coming to another one here. This is the region we're talking about right here. And at the base of these, the very foot of these rivers, right in here, on the eastern side, very fertile gardens, beautiful place, but it wasn't the kind of place that the Muslims could fight very well. In fact, they were at a disadvantage on the eastern side. Oops. But on the western side of the river, it started being desert again over here. And so he brought his troops up, and he lured the Persian armies to come on their side, which would give them the advantage, which was a desert region. They were excellent, because they could move fast in the desert. Persians couldn't. They got bogged down in the sand and so forth. In their weakened form, basically they had a victory. They battled these Persian troops and won them on the western side of this river. Brought the spoils of war. They had all kinds of wealth, armament, all sorts of stuff. These leaders and Muslim people that got them were suddenly, they're so rich. And they thought, hey, this is pretty nice. We're down here in the desert eating on crumbs when there's all this wealth to the north of us with the Persians and these Byzantine Roman people, and they've got everything. And in these battles, they would treat people very cruelly, as you know. Let me mention to you here their treatment of women. I think I've got that as one of the things to talk about here. You can imagine, they didn't treat women then very nicely, as they don't treat them nice anymore today. They treat women as property, of course. But in a battle, in a war, there was permission for the fighters, for the soldiers in the war, basically, to kill all the men and to rape all the women. Now, they would kill all the men because that was the soldier. And most times when there were these tribes that would fight, and that's where they got the ideas from, the tribes, the men would go out to the front and they would be in battle. The women folks of the tribe would be to the back with all their children with tambourines and music instruments. They'd be cheering their men folks on. Well, you can imagine if all the men got killed in battle, that's what they did. They wouldn't take prisoners. They just kill everyone, chop their heads off and stuff. If all the men were killed, their women folk were helpless. And basically, they just came, got the women, made slaves of them and their children, put them into slavery, sent them away, or took them for their own slaves. Slavery was a big thing in Muslim tradition. You took an army or you won a battle, you could keep the slavery. A female prisoner could be sold, abandoned, given away, or killed at the master's whim. Whatever you want to do. One of the Quran statements in Surah 4:3, for example, says that men may marry such women as seem good to you, 2 or 3 or 4. 4 is the maximum, according to the Quran. Only do what your right hand possess. Right hand possess means those who you capture. The husband can divorce a wife by simply saying, I divorce thee. Still do it today. Then like a wife, then like a married partner, in Orthodox or devout Muslims, same thing. I divorce you and you're out. Think about the difference between that and Christianity. In Christianity, loose sexual contact or conduct was frowned upon. Was said, that's wrong. That is wrong to do that. You maintain faithfulness with one woman. Muhammad gave permission. Muslim warriors commonly raped women on the battlefield within view of their husbands and fathers, or in front of the corpses of their husbands and fathers, as a display of dominance. In other words, that nation showed we overcome you. We have power over you. Of course, rape is that thing. It's an overpowering thing. It was to show that you were to submit. That's what Islam means. It means submission. And by the way, I'm going to read the passage in the Quran that says it, I think, if I find it. Surah 23 says that, that's not what I'm looking for. But anyway, it tells us here that in battle, when you're conquered, it's hell on earth for you. The men were usually slaughtered outright. Their chiefs were usually singled out for the grotesque agony of crucifixion. Adult male survivors, if they did survive, became slaves. Screaming women and children dragged from their homes were assessed, inventoried, parceled out among the victors. Most of them would end up in the slave market. Prettier women and girls were forced to have sex with the Islamic warriors who had just slaughtered their father. So you see the picture here. This is not a sweet, peaceful religion. This is hard. This is terror. You talk about terror today, it's always been terror from the very beginning. Now, every Muslim today, most of them probably are lost. I don't know anything seriously anyway. But many may not know their own background. I don't know. But they do have sense enough not to speak up, not to speak against what is in their background, or they will be targeted. Excuse me. Motivation to fight. Why would people fight? Man, there were all kinds of spoils. If you were the victor, if you won, your troops won, you got all kinds of clothing, money, gold, plunder, and all that was yours. Of course, involved in that was pure terror, the people you were going against. You had horses, carpets, the most beautiful women you can imagine would be yours, all from an act of war. So that was in their minds. These are things that are available to us. That's why when they looked to the north and thought, we just have a lousy desert here, and all this is to the north, let's move out and see what we can do. And of course, the thinking was that God's going to be with us. Allah is with us. As long as we're winning, we must be doing the right thing, and Allah's supporting us. So they turned, rather than going to Persia, they won the one battle in Persia. Now they turned their attention and turned to the west, northwest, and towards Syria. Syria is right where the Palestine region is, just north of that, right here. You can see that at Damascus and Gary. And rather than split their forces, they kind of combined them, brought them over here. Had two quick victories over the Byzantine forces. Muslims won in 634. And in that same year, he'd only been caliph for 2 years, Bakr died. He got sick, had a fever, and died. And they announced, or I think Bakr may have announced right before he died, that Umar would then become the next caliph. So he basically passed the succession on. So we're not surprised. Now, Umar continued his fight with Syria. Damascus fell in 635. The Byzantine armies had a counterattack, came back and recaptured Damascus in 636. But in that same year, the Arabs came back, and with a big, huge sandstorm, the Arabs didn't have any problem because they'd been in sandstorms all their life, with camels and stuff. They could continue the attack under the cover, you might say, of all this sand blowing, and so they just slaughtered their opponents. They'd never been in a sandstorm before. That was called the Battle of Yarmouk. It annihilated the entire imperial force there, the army of Byzantines. 636. And that year, Palestine fell, the entire Palestine region fell to the Muslims. And that means Jerusalem, Bethlehem, all these places that Christians and Jews very much honor. Now the Muslims control all this, all the way up to Antioch. Places where the church was first founded are now under Muslim control for at least 450 years, until what we call the Crusades came along. Christian groups from Europe came down and took some of those places back. But you can imagine all the churches and all the places now become mosques. Now think about what they did, their choices they gave Christians or anybody they conquered. When they would come in and take over a town or community, they would give them a choice, same choice they would give the Arabs, and that is, number one, convert. Convert or die. Or, if they let them live, it would be pay a special tax. I think it was called a disease or something like that, it's an odd name. But if you were a Christian, you could survive, but you had to pay an extravagant tax. And that was good, because Muslims liked that money coming in. If you paid the tax, you'd be all right. But there's some other condition they put on, was no bell ringing. No ringing of bells announcing Christianity. No crosses. I didn't mention this, but Muhammad hated crosses. Now, for some reason, he saw the cross as something he didn't want to have in his presence. If he would go into a house and see two boards nailed across in the form of a cross. Didn't even mean it to mean the Christian faith, but it angered him. He would tear it down. He hated the thought of the cross. No crosses were allowed in any of these regions where they conquered. The gospel was prohibited. You could not preach the gospel under the possibility of death, really. If you preach the gospel, you'd be executed immediately. And if you converted a Muslim person, converted to Christianity, or converted to any other religion, immediately they'd be executed. In other words, predominant picture, the visible predominance in all these regions was the Muslim faith, Islam. The minarets, the mosques, everything had to be Islamic. That was to show that they were the dominant folks. If you had a church, you could have a church maybe, but you didn't put any cross on it. You didn't make any display about it. You certainly couldn't have your building higher than the local mosque. And that same submissive attitude. We conquer and we keep you down. It's a purely fascist type of approach. You have to submit in your thinking, in your action, even how you look. You've got to be under this tyranny, basically, what it is. Well, they received, or they took over the whole Palestine region. Now they turn their attention back to Persia. And let me show that map again. There it is. From here, they again went north, back to this region down in here. In fact, there was a big battle right to the north. The first one was here. I think I named it there. Kadima, I think it's on the paper there. I don't know if you did. That was the first battle they won a while back. Now they're going for a second battle, and that was Kadisha. Anyway, it was located up the Euphrates River here, about in here somewhere, and it's not on the map. But the town where they had the battle, and had a Persian general who had elephants. You believe it? They were like tanks. Because the armies of the Muslims saw these things, and they hit them with swords, and it didn't even affect these big, huge animals. They had a whole army of their soldiers riding up on top of elephants, sort of like a tank battalion. And the Muslims they couldn't figure out how to attack these people. And they were basically, the lines were held. There was a stalemate, nobody winning, nobody losing, until what's called a night of fury. The Arabs decided, let's attack during the night. Persians weren't used to that. They just figured we'll wait till daytime and have our battles. The Arabs, growing up in the desert, they were used to doing everything at night. They were like a bunch of coyotes or foxes anyway, and so they made a surprise attack, breaking through the lines, and they killed this General Rustam. And so basically they won, beating Persia. And again, remember, their armies were depleted anyway, but the Arabs won. And this 1,300-year-old Persian Empire, begun way back, remember when Cyrus let the Jews go back? It was 600 BC, or 500 something BC. Is now destroyed, is annihilated. And so for the next 50 years, the Muslim people, these armies, not only are they taking town after town and having the people to submit or die, they're continuing to go and move from the 50 years, traveling across these mountains all the way over to India, not even on our map. And they ended up in the western side of India, again, bringing the Muslim religion along with them. So think about it. Syria subdued, Persia subdued, Muslim general named Amr bin al-Asai had this crazy idea, why don't we invade Egypt? I mean, Egypt is another country that's next to them, but Egypt has this protection of a river. They have all this desert region here. They thought, how in the world? And Alexandria is located about here. Alexandria was a Christian area, had been a center of knowledge and wisdom for years in the Christian faith. And this guy said, let's try to look in and see what we can do. Sure enough, got there, and again, because of division, spiritual division, really, the theology that was going on, they had this monophysite belief that the Christian, Coptic Christians there believed that Jesus was fully God, but he just was clothed in this man-like body. wasn't really fully man. And basically he was the Arian, or they were Arian persuasion. But the Orthodox Christians up in Constantinople, they kept telling him, no, you got to be this way. They named a Orthodox patriarch named Cyrus to lead them. And he was so brutal to the Coptic Christians who lived in Egypt that the Egyptian Christians were like, oh, come on in, Muslims, you'll help us out. We're being treated so wrong by this. Orthodox folks, the Roman folks, are the ones who said that this is the right way. They're persecuting them, basically. So the Muslims were the lesser of two evils for the local people. People in the cities probably didn't see it that way. But Amr's strategy, this man that was the Muslim general going in to attack Egypt, his strategy was very simple. That is posed as a peaceful religion. Does that sound familiar? Well, we're just a peaceful religion. And Cyrus, this patriarch, put in place by the Roman emperor, his name was Heracles, I think. Suddenly he became a traitor. He thought, well, these people are okay, they're nice, let's just surrender to them. He sent a letter to Emperor Heraclius and said, would it be all right if we just surrender the city to these people? They seem pretty nice, nice, peaceful folks. So he did. In 641, he surrendered. He yielded up the city of Alexandria, this Christian community which had libraries and stuff, Greek-centered type of faiths over the years, over the century. Great theological trainings there. Origen, one of the great early Christians, grew up there and had such influence. But once he yielded this over to the Muslims, the whole city, this whole region became, all the Christian influence was lost. The writings, the learnings, even the libraries that were there were all taken over by the Muslims. There was not even a vestige of the Christian influence in this area after this. And the Muslims, instead of making their capital in Alexandria, they formed a new capital in Cairo, which is again today the present center. 644, Umar, again, this is only 10 years approximately, he served as caliph. He was assassinated. He was a very, ordinary type of man. He would hang around with a crowd with normal people. He'd just hang around with people. He didn't try to be anything special. And one day a slave came up to him and asked him, was complaining because the master wasn't paying him enough or something, and he calculated how much he was being paid. He said, oh, you're all right. And went his way. Well, that slave got mad about that. Came back to him when he was leading prayers one day and brought a knife and stabbed him in the back and right through his stomach as well. Umar lay there, and of course they knew he was dying. It took him several hours before he died. But when Umar died, it was what we call the end of the golden age of Muslim or Islam faith. And actually, these first three or four caliphs, first two of them were very humble people. What they believed was, they were personally very humble. But he was knifed by a slave. And so as he was dying, he said, okay, let me suggest that you, Abdul Rahman, who was there, a very faithful soldier, had fought a lot of battles, why don't you become the next caliph? Why don't you become the next leader? And Abdul said, no, I couldn't do it. I have to decline that. I can't. So here's Umar lying there about to die. He said, I tell you what, let's form a committee. I'll have 5 people, 5 of you leaders to be on this committee. One was Ali, his son-in-law, and actually the adopted son of Muhammad. Uthman, who was also married to a couple of Muhammad's daughters. They had died, of course, but there was a relationship with all those. But Ali and Uthman were in that committee, and there were 3 others. I don't know all the names, but they were there too. And don't know the name I'm talking about here. But Umar thought, let's have this unanimous, because the previous caliphs were all unanimous. So this committee, you have to be unanimous, whoever you want. And if it's not unanimous, then we'll have to do it this way. And by the way, they started, as soon as he turned it over to these 5, they started arguing and fighting like Arabs would do, and fighting, oh, I believe this man should be, no, I think this one should be. And they were in the room shouting so much. Umar's son came over and said, would you just calm down until he dies before you have your arguments? Because he's still living. And he was still alive, but Umar said to them that it needs to be unanimous. If it's not unanimous, the loser, you might have 4-1 or 3-2. Whoever loses, behead him, cut his head off. Because otherwise you'll have division in the Muslim faith after that. So whoever loses, execute. Well, that kind of hindered the folks who wanted to join in the candidate. I might lose. And both these two fellows, Ali and Uthman, were the two main ones, and they're both kind of hesitant to say, I want to be Khalid. No, because if they lose, according to Umar, they were to be killed. Well, they still debated, and they finally came up with these two, and they asked Abdul Rahman, the one they originally asked to be the Caliph, refused. You decide. You make the decision. So that question, he asked Ali, he asked Uthman. He said to Ali, will you bind yourself to follow in the footsteps of Muhammad? Will you follow the Quran? Will you do all these things in a long question? And of course, the response should be yes. But he said, I will try to my best of my ability to do that. He asked the other one, I said his name was Uthman. Asked Uthman the same question. Will you promise to do blah, blah, blah? And as soon as he heard that question, he said, yes, I will. Didn't hesitate at all. Ali was a little hesitant. He was younger and he probably thought, I want my head cut off. They didn't cut his head off anyway, but they decided, the one who said, yes, I'll do it, he's obviously the one that should be choice. Uthman became the caliph. Umar died, of course. Uthman was rather brutal. He took back the old Arab order. When there was divisions, these fighting, these kind of cliquish groups, selfishness, family favoritism. He did all that. He put some of his own family, the Quraysh family, in positions of power across the empire, giving them towns and cities to lead. And it kind of bothered the other Arabs. They felt like you're being partisan here. You're being sort of looking out for yourself. And that was the way that ancient Arabs or the older Arab groups were like. So after about 12 years, he continued serving as the caliph. After 12 years of his rule, there was, of course, a rebellion. Folks fought. In 656, a group of Arabs attacked him. They killed Uthman. Ali, the one that didn't get to be caliph before, they assumed he might have been involved with this, that he might have instigated some of this rebellion. And from that rebellion, from Uthman's being killed, there became a division in Islam to this very day. Enemies of Ali, called the Umayyas, and the followers of the Alawites, which is Ali's group. And 6 days later, Ali declared himself, he became caliph. He claimed the leadership of all Islam. And Ali had some reasons for that. He was the first convert. Of course, he was family, but he was the first convert in Muhammad's converts. He was married to the daughter of Muhammad. He was married to Fatima. And also, he was younger, too. He was a young man. They're sort of tired of having all these old guys that are going to die in a few years. They wanted a younger man. And this was all these good reasons. But he made a lot of Arab people mad because he did not avenge the death and that rebellion against Uthman. The murder that happened against Uthman, the people who killed him. And it was a cruel, brutal killing. He just said, oh, we're not worried about it. Because that made them suspicious. Maybe he was in on it. And he also, Ali dismissed all those family members that Uthman had placed in positions of power. He dismissed them all and put his own family members in place. Governors, military leaders, all these other people. And again, the Muslim armies started to form. And they wanted to battle, instead of other people, they started battling each other. It's like a civil war. Aliyites versus Umayyads. And what's called the Battle of the Camel. They named it that because Aisha, Muhammad's wife, got trapped on a litter on top of a camel in the midst of the battlefield. And here's this woman, this very famous in the Muslim faith, Muhammad's actual wife, his favorite wife, and she's up on a camel, and these troops all around her trying to protect her, and 70 troops were killed trying to defend her to get her out of the battle. That's why it's called the Battle of the Camel. But out of that developed this division between the Muslim people. Of course, when you're fighting each other anyway, there's not a lot of love lost anyhow. But first breakaway sect or group that came out of this were called the Karaites. And this movement, Karaites, I guess it is. But this movement came out of this, and these are the folks who were devout Muslims. They memorized the Quran. They totally loved the things of Muhammad and all that he believed in the Quran. They were a vicious group of people as well. They hated the Umayyads, they hated the Aliyites, they hated both groups. They considered other people as worldly. If they didn't follow the way of Muhammad, the Karaites thought they were, and Karaite means dissenter, by the way. These folks wanted a world government, governed by the will of Allah. Does that sound familiar? Not like the radical Islam today. By the way, the Karaites, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, they disbanded, or they were no more heard from them during the Middle Ages. So even though they were there at that time and they became an actual organization, they kind of lost place. But the theme and the thinking of the Karaites persisted all through the centuries and is today. Anyone who deviates from true Islam were the targets of their violence. That included fellow Muslims. So they didn't care. They felt like it was a true and proper way to be a Muslim, and they had to be their way or no way. They had a showdown battle in 657 at Siffon, and that was actually what they were going to do. This group, this terrorist group, decided, let's just get rid of all these leaders. Let's get rid of Ali and these other generals who were opposing him. Let's just kill them all. And so they had tried to assassinate them all. The only one they really killed was Ali, and they did get him. And ultimately, he was killed, and as a result, two Islamic groups came out of that. Shiites were the followers of Ali, and later Sunnis, or the spiritual Kharijites, who later, and that Sunni means they follow the tradition. The Aliites, or the Shiites, were the ones who followed the bloodline, supposedly. We're going to end our time here, and I'm sorry I've gone so long ago. We've only covered about 25 years from Muhammad's death. We're going to try to get to about 100 years after his death, because in 100 years after his death, some good things happened. Something wonderful happened. And you can thank a man by the name of Charles Martel for the fact that we today, have Christian freedom, because the Muslims plan to take over the entire world of Christianity. They want to take it all. We'll talk about that hopefully next time. The westward march of Islam. Now they're over in the desert right now. They're taking part of Egypt. They're going to take a 3,000-mile trek across the top of Africa and on into Spain in just a few times. Next week, I hope we'll cover all that. And I realize we've covered a lot of detail. And I said this morning, I named him Muhammad Ali. I realized most of you thought I was talking about the boxer. I thought that was his name. I made that mistake. His actual name is Muhammad bin Allah bin Hashem. So, he had a long name, and I confused it and got it wrong. I saw it somewhere like that. He had a long name, but we all know his name. And his name is written in various ways. It was spelled with an O or a U, and sometimes it was spelled Muhammad with a T on it. So, it's just all kinds of various spelling. And I don't know if I've covered all that. So this is what we'll talk about next time when you see crossing North Africa there, that light green section there, on into Spain, all those areas where they go the next 70 years until Charles the Hammer stopped that in what's called France today. He was a Frank. He was a Germanic Frenchman. Any questions before we close our time? Sorry for going so fast. I realize there's a lot of details.
Hashemites and the Umayyads, what were they? I missed that.
Okay, we talked briefly about them, and I really didn't name them before, but before Muhammad came along, his family members, I think they were grandparents or his great-grandfather, in fact, I think it was 3 greats, was the one who took over Mecca. Their families, their children had some squabbles and stuff, and one was Haran, the other was the names are slipping right now. But anyway, these two groups, this is before Muhammad's time, they fought each other. They were about to come into battle. And they didn't like each other all along. Muhammad descended from the Hashemites. That's his family. And again, they kept all, and so there's all this friction, this division. And so when Muhammad brought about all these folks into his religion, the other group, and if I can name them, Kasharites or whatever, they didn't come in his faith until finally, toward the end of his life, they finally agreed to become Muslims. So their group wasn't really fully in favor of Muslim. And so when this Uthman, he was of the other tribe. He was not the Hashemites like Muhammad. So a little bit of a problem there to most Arabs. They thought, we really should stay in Muhammad's line. So anyway, again, it has to do with jealousy, envy, pettiness, all thrown together in what's called a religion of peace. Let's have a word of prayer, please. Lord, I thank you again. I realize this is history, and ancient history, and events and people that we'll probably never know about and fully understand. But we realize, Lord, the general gist we understand that this is not something that is good and moral and upstanding. It's really just basically pillaging and terror upon people for the cause of a political agenda and so-called religious agenda. But Lord, we know the truth. The truth truly sets us free. And the love of Christ convinces us and persuades us rather than someone forcing and standing over us with power. So thank you, Lord. And the power we want is the power of the Holy Spirit. So take us from this day and use us in Jesus' name we pray.